The Trump administration is rushing at full speed to bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. But the tremors of Donald Trump's moves are being felt globally. In just a few days, Trump has pulled the rug from under Ukraine's feet. He has made friends with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He has practically shunned Europe from the peace talks, and he has brought Saudi Arabia into the picture to play a key role in the talks. This is Ukraine's endgame in the making. So what's on Trump's mind, and who are the winners and losers of this approach? This is Shubhangi Sharma. Let's dive in. There's a flurry of activity in recent days as US President Donald Trump enters mission mode to end the Russia-Ukraine war as he had promised before his election. Two urgent meetings are taking place almost simultaneously. The first is in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov are meeting to discuss Ukraine. The second is in Paris, France, where European leaders who have been left behind by Trump desperately gathered to navigate this tricky situation. Meanwhile, Ukraine is absent from both discussions and is struggling to maintain visibility in diplomatic maneuvers that shape its own future. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is not sitting hand in hand. Zelensky has reached out to the UAE, where he currently is, not only to sign economic deals, but also to leverage Emirati influence with the Saudis, Russians, and Americans to hear his pleas. And can you blame him for panicking? Under Donald Trump, the United States has done a complete 180. Three events within a week have laid it out bare. Number one, Trump's phone call with Putin. Number two, Pete Hegseth's speech in Brussels. And number three, J.D. Vance's scolding of Europe. Last week, Trump held a lengthy phone call with Putin, where everything was discussed, not just Ukraine, but artificial intelligence, the Middle East, and Soviet Russia's sacrifice in World War II. Negotiations will start immediately, and most interestingly, Trump even said that they will eventually visit each other's nations. Imagine Putin in Washington, D.C. after being termed a war criminal. This image would be impossible to conceive just weeks ago, but it's now becoming a reality. This game-changing phone call came at a time when Ukraine and Europe were already grappling with another earth-shattering statement from US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who crushed all hopes for Ukraine. He landed four major blows in one speech. Firstly, there would be no NATO membership for Ukraine. Second, there's no going back to Ukraine's 2014 borders, which means getting back Crimea from Russia is not on the table. Hegseth said that this Ukrainian goal was unrealistic and chasing it would only prolong the war. Thirdly, there will be no US troops in Ukraine, and finally, the US will no longer prioritize European security and it will focus on its own borders. This speech was brutal, but turns out the US was only getting started. At the Munich Security Conference, Vice President J.D. Vance was tasked with a slightly different assignment: humbling Europe. This was nothing less than a rude awakening for European leaders. J.D. Vance basically lit the MAGA fire in their home turf. Vance minced no words when he scolded the continent for deindustrializing, obsessing over climate change, and cracking down on free speech and populist political parties. The message was clear. There's a new sheriff in town, and he is not keen on paying for Europe's security or taking lectures on democracy from Europe.
In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
This was a nuanced yet blunt speech. European leaders are not used to being talked to this way. It weakens their standing in domestic politics and boosts populist forces that are on the rise. They see it as a political attack from across the ocean that can accelerate their decline. So the backlash was almost instant, but the damage was already done. In one go, Trump has ended Putin's international isolation, crushed Western unity on the war, and declared that the US commitment to defending Europe is evaporating. There are no free lunches. Europe and Ukraine are finding out the hard way. The fear is that by minimizing Europe and Ukraine's role in the peace settlement, Trump might accept just about any deal with Russia, even if it hurts Ukraine. Gone are the days of the as long as it takes approach of the Biden administration. It's no longer all or nothing. Critics also say that the US has given up leverage by being hard on Ukraine and Europe even before entering talks with Russia. European nations fear that Putin will come for other nations after Ukraine. Poland and the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia are the most at risk. Moreover, Europe has crossed well over $100 billion in aid, surpassing the USA's $88 billion disbursed so far. So it should be getting a seat at the table. But here's where it's hard to take Europe seriously. 3 years of the war have come to pass. Russia occupies almost 25% of Ukraine's territory. Tens of thousands of lives have been lost to the war. Front lines have remained unchanged for over a year, and yet Europe wants a complete victory for Ukraine, along with Zelensky, whose political future hinges on either the illusory prospect of victory or the continuation of a drawn-out war. Where does this leave Ukraine then? You see, Trump has a deal for Ukraine. Kiev can either hand over $500 billion worth of its critical mineral wealth to the US over a period of time, or it can be served up on a platter to Russia. In an interview with Fox News, Trump claimed that Ukraine had essentially agreed to give $500 billion to the US. He said that they have tremendously valuable land in terms of oil, gas, and rare earths. However, he warned that Ukraine would be handed over to Russia on a plate if Kiev rejected the deal. And then came the most chilling words. They may make a deal, they may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday. But I want this money back. So basically, Trump may help Ukraine out, even with weapons, but not without an impossible trade that virtually gives up half of Ukraine's natural resources to the US. So if Ukraine wants this to go its own way, it's going to have to give up basically its own sovereignty to the US. The war-torn Ukraine would essentially be bankrolling its fight with Russia. This shark treatment puts Zelensky between a rock and a hard place. Trump's focus on Saudi Arabia is also important. Trump is trying to get the Saudis to bring down the price of oil and accept a deal on Gaza as well. The geopolitical spotlight is on Riyadh now, and helping end the war in Ukraine could boost its global standing. So the endgame for Ukraine does not look good. The only hope for Zelensky now is Trump's proclivity to evolve his position with each passing day. But a war lost on the battlefield is a war lost on the negotiating table, and there are no miracles in waiting. Ukraine has turned to European leadership to plead its case, which it will, but to what extent? Europe has its own problems as Trump turns the screws on it. So what's left? A very satisfied Putin, I suppose.